Yeah, just wait till you have left. Mm-hmm.
Can you guys try testing the sound?
Yeah. How would we do that?
Yeah.
You can ask. Can people hear me?
Okay.
Okay, cool. We'll start over again.
Okay. Straight from the beginning.
Go for it.
Okay. Hello. We are at Palo. We have a bird here this morning. I'm just going to do a quick introduction later, but my name is Andrea.
I'm Katie. And I'm Sam.
And then we'll just get started into the bird banding process.
Yeah, so the bird that Katie is holding right now is a species of hummingbird called the Anna's hummingbird. And it's very common around much of California, especially here at the Palomarin field station. And Katie has already put a small metal band on the bird's leg. This band has a unique number, which if we ever encounter this bird again, we'll be able to know it's the same individual. Katie's also taken a number of different kinds of data on this bird. She is now about to get a weight on the bird. That bird is 4.5 grams. That is the weight, roughly the weight of a nickel. It's a very small bird.
I think all we have left
is
okay.
That's it.
And before we release this bird, and we can talk a little bit more about some of the other information that Katie collected later, but we're going to do something we do with our hummingbirds here, which is to feed them a little bit of sugar water, just to give them a bit of a boost before we send them on their way. And sometimes they drink it up right away. Sometimes it takes them a second, but it looks like this bird is drinking right now. Yeah. Ooh, really drinking a lot. Oh my gosh, yeah. All right. Looks good.
That's one of my favorite parts of this job, is to feed the hummingbirds and process hummingbirds. They're so sweet and delicate.
All right.
So I'm gonna let this bird go.
I think it was less. I think it was 4 points. So it's a young bird.
So sometimes with our hummingbirds, they're a little bit more shy and they take a while to fly off. You just gotta bump them into the air a little bit so they get the wind on their wings and it takes them off. So he flew off well.
Great.
So we'll write
Great.
that down in our table.
All right, and
Okay.
yeah. So Andre, do you want to?
Yeah, I can go
intro?
get
Okay.
started. I'll just wait for the camera to go down for a little. Okay, cool. Awesome. Yeah, thank you everyone for joining us here for our live. We are here at Palomarin field station. For those who don't know, we are located in the southern end of the Point Reyes National Seashore in Bolinas, California. And so today we're just hoping to get to show all the science that we do at this banding station, and for you guys to experience what it's like to have a bird banded here. And so, yeah, I can share a little bit more about Point Blue in Palomarin. So Point Blue is a nonprofit research institution, and their main headquarters is in Petaluma, California. And so Point Blue's main mission is to conserve birds, wildlife, and other ecosystems through the use of science, outreach, and partnership. And so that is what we're about. So Palomarin was founded in 1966, which makes it about the longest running population studies of birds along the west of the Mississippi River. So now that you know a little bit more context about who we are and who we work for, I'll hand it over to Katie. You can share more about why we collect data on birds.
So we study birds because they can tell us a lot about the environment and the ecosystem around us. Birds are incredibly diverse, abundant, widespread, and they occupy so many different niches of the environment and the ecosystem. So they're great indicators of the change in health of an ecosystem. And so we put bands on birds so we can monitor their populations over time. And so, like Sam was saying, every bird has a unique band and a band number, and so we can capture those birds. And we take a couple different data points from the birds. The main ones that we take are the species, the age, and the sex. We do a couple other measurements and things as well, but those are the three main ones we try to get. And that gives us an idea of the species composition of the habitat around us, as well as the population demographics, like the ratio of adults to young birds, and the ratio of males to females. And we can relate that to the environment around us and how it's changing. So one example of how that's been used in our data can be shown by the white-crowned sparrow. And so here at Palomarin, most of our nets were originally set up as a coastal scrub habitat. And so our nets were surrounded by small shrubs and bushes. And because of habitat succession and conifer encroachment, now Palomarin has changed into more of a Douglas fir forest. And we have a lot of foresty plants in the area, so it's changed quite a bit. And with that changing environment, and because of our long-term data set, we've been able to compare how the bird composition has changed along with the changing environment. And so as a coastal scrub environment, we used to have a bunch of white-crowned sparrows. It was one of our main species that we were looking at. We would monitor their breeding populations and nesting habitat, and we had a bunch of them. And we've been able to watch their populations decline as the conifers have encroached into the area and into our netting lanes. And so now in my almost 4 months of being here, I've only ever seen one white-crowned sparrow. So it's been a pretty dramatic decrease as the habitat has changed. So that's one example, but there's lots of things we can do with such a robust and long-term data set. So birds are a great thing to study, and they tell us a lot about the environment around us. So that's kind of the why we study birds, and I'll pass along to Sam for the how.
Yeah, so I just want to introduce everyone to the tools we have here, the resources we use to collect data about these birds. First and foremost, I should mention that we have data sheets where we collect lines of information about these birds. The information that we collect ranges from characteristics of a bird's body condition, so how well it's doing, like fat and like weight, which you saw us collect on that hummingbird. We also collect important information about how old birds are, and we'll explain a little bit later how we go about doing that. But of course, we are a banding station, so very importantly, we need a lot of tools to put those bands on the bird's leg. And this is what some of those bands look like. They come in different sizes so that we always make sure we put the right sized band on a bird. Those sizes range from the hummingbird bands all the way up to these larger bands that we would use for a species like a band-tailed pigeon, which is a species we have around here. Yeah, if you see that size comparison. But the bands are similar in that they all have a unique number on them. Okay. We also, in order to put the bands on the bird's legs, we use specialized banding pliers. And these pliers have a little hole at the top that corresponds to a certain size band, and that way we are closing bands safely and completely around a bird's leg. We also have different measuring tools that we use to take various measurements on the birds. This is a tool that we use to collect data on wing length. The little hinge at the top allows us to basically just rest it very gently over the bend of the bird's wing. We also have a more fine scale measuring tool called calipers, and these we can use for smaller and finer measurements that we take. And then we also, I don't know if it's how easy it is to see, but we have color bands. So this is a different type of band than the metal bands that we put on birds' legs. These color bands we use for a few of the species that we want to be able to recognize individual birds out in the field. So here at Palomarin, we have a few species that we will put color bands on. Those include the wren tit, which is like kind of a fan favorite at the station, spotted towhees, white crowned sparrows, if they are around. Let's see what else. Song sparrows and California scrub jay. Yep. And with those species, the color bands, basically we will put a unique combination of colors on a bird's leg. And that way, if we're able to see that bird out in the field, we don't have to capture it to know which individual we're seeing. And that's very handy for mapping territory size, understanding which birds are interacting with which other birds. Yep, and then lastly, last tools we have here are the tools that we use to weigh the birds. So you saw Katie put a hummingbird on the scale, but for most of the birds, we can't just, place them on the scale without expecting them to fly off. So what we do is we actually put the birds very gently into these different sized cups, and then we can just rest the cup on the scale and get a weight that way. All right. All right.
So when we first get the bird in hand, we have nets that are set up around the station. So here at Palomarin, we have 20 nets that are set up all around. We check them every 30 minutes, but depending on environment, if it's cold, if it's a little bit breezy or too hot, then we'll check them more often. And so we go and check the nets. If there's a bird in the net, we'll take it out. We'll put it in a little bird bag where they're nice and safe and warm, and we'll bring them back to the station. And so we'll have one of us processing the bird, like I was for the hummingbird, and then one of us scribe, like Andrea was when I was processing the hummingbird. So like Sam was saying, there's a whole slew of information that we take from the birds. We will put a band on the bird, like Sam was saying, with a unique combination, but a huge portion of the birds that we catch are already banded. And so right now there's a huge portion of the birds that we catch already have a band, which is cool to see when they were banded and by who they were banded. But now it's baby season, and so lots of babies are starting to hatch and fly in our nets, and we get to band a bunch of new birds. So now we're having our recapture rates decrease and a bunch new birds going into the net. So the hummingbird that I got this morning was a baby, and there's a couple different ways to tell whether or not it's a baby. It can be very difficult, but like I was saying, age and sex are the two main things that we look at. As well as the species. And so if you want to talk a little bit about how we age babies, because it can be hard to tell whether or not a bird is a baby or an adult.
Yeah, so I might start with hummingbirds since we already got to see a hummingbird. But essentially when a hummingbird is developing, so when it's still in the egg, as its bill develops, it develops with these very fine grooves running along the length of the bill. I don't know how easy it is to see. And once the bird, as the bird is out in the world foraging and moving around, gradually those little hash marks will start to wear off the bill. So by looking closely at the bill, we can tell the extent to which those marks have started to wear off. And a young bird is the only bird we would expect to have most of its bill covered in those fine grooves. In an adult bird, we would see a bill with no or few of those little grooves. But with most other birds that aren't hummingbirds, we use a few other characteristics to help age them. And one of the big ones that we use is skull development, actually. So this is a diagram that shows the progression of formation of a second layer of bone over a bird's skull. So when the bird hatches, it has one layer of bone over the skull, and over time, in its first few months especially, a second layer of bone will form, and little struts of bone will start to form between those two layers. Anyway, we can we can basically part feathers on the bird's head and basically see through the skin to view the top of the skull. It's nothing that, it doesn't hurt the birds at all. It's not invasive. We usually just use a little bit of water to part the feathers and we can see right through. And so what we're looking for is often what we would maybe call a window. So like a window where that second layer of bone has not yet formed. And when we see the pattern and extent to which the skull has developed, that gives us clues as to whether the bird is young or older. One of the other things we'll use to help age some songbirds is plumage characteristics. So one of the species that's very common around here, especially up in the woods, is the dark-eyed junco. And actually, as a young bird, I have some specimens here to show. But you can see they both have quite a lot of white on the sides of their tail, so that's very similar between adults and young birds. But this bird is an adult, and this bird is a young bird. And you can see that the young birds are very brownish and streaky, whereas the adults have like much more of a clean plumage and bolder colors. And it might be helpful to show what they look like on the back a little bit, but you can see that streakiness in the young bird kind of extends over the whole back and head. And that gives us a clue that that is a young bird.
We've got one question in the chat right now.
Great.
What made you all decide to study birds?
Okay. I can get started and then we can just go down. So I got into birds around the start of the pandemic. I think it was something that I just wasn't really interested in before until I had the time to like go out and look at birds. But yeah, I was doing a undergraduate thesis where I was going out to a marine protected area and I was seeing a bunch of shorebirds, so I decided to monitor their abundance. And there I got to see all the different species, and that's what got me really into at least wildlife monitoring. And then last summer, I did work as a seasonal park ranger up in the Oregon coast, and there I was able to do some more seabird monitoring. And I think that just gave me more exposure and more desire to work with birds. And so now I'm at Palo, and I've been learning a lot, and songbirds are great. So it's been amazing so far. And I'll hand it off to Katie.
I always knew that I wanted to study ecology and wildlife biology, but I wasn't really sure what. And so as an undergrad, I wanted to get some credit, so I kind of haphazardly joined a random lab, and it happened to be an ornithology or a bird lab. And I didn't think much of it. I think I was like very like entranced by the big fancy mammals that are very charismatic. So at first I was like, oh, birds. But it was very quickly that birds stole my heart, and they're so lovable, they're so charismatic themselves, and they're so interesting to study. Like I was saying before, birds are so diverse and ubiquitous, and occupy so many cool and interesting niches of the environment. So if there's anything you're curious about in the natural world, there's probably some bird out there that has that biological trait or does that behavior. So they're pretty easy to love, and I haven't really looked back since I got into birds.
I feel like we kind of like run the whole spectrum, but yeah, I've been, I got interested in birds when I was in elementary school. Kind of like hit me like a ton of bricks, but I really got interested in birds when I learned about the conservation story of the peregrine falcon, which for much of like in the mid 1900s, peregrine populations were declining due to use of the pesticide DDT. And, you know, of course, I was born well after that, but I remember reading about that conservation story and reading about the falcon's comeback, and that's like really what inspired me to get interested in birds and get interested in conservation too. And I also have not looked back since. I sort of got swept up in it and haven't really put that interest down. So
Yeah. That's a great question. And I don't know if we mentioned previously, but we are apprentices. Like Andrea was saying, Point Blue has been running this station for the last 60 or so years. And it's this incredible station, and we catch birds, and we have this long-term data set. But a really cool thing that Point Blue does is every few months, so for us every 6 months, they hire a different group of apprentices, and we're trained in bird banding and mist netting, which are the nets that catch the birds. And so it's this really intensive training program, but it's really great for us in our careers, and we're taught so many things that help us become better scientists and ornithologists and field workers in general. So it's this incredible program that we've gotten to do this spring. So we're the spring-summer apprentices.
And I know we have talked about what we do at Palo, but we also will go to off-sites and band there, which is really interesting because we can get to see the kinds of different birds that are caught at the different sites. So some sites will have more like Swainson's thrushes than other ones, and then it's cool because we can get to look at the data online and see what birds that we've caught have been found and where, which is really cool. And we also do phenology at off-sites as well, so we've been learning about plants, and monitoring plants, which is also a long-term thing that we have been doing at Palo. And we also collect weather at the station and the off-sites that we do. So it is more than bird banding. It's lots of data collection and data analysis, which is also great if you're interested in field work and learning more what it's like to be a field biologist.
We should mention, please put questions in the chat if happening. We'd be happy to answer them. Share
what your favorite bird is. We like birds.
Question.
Okay.
Does anyone want to explain what phenology is?
Okay. I believe it is just the study and collection of plants. So at least when we go to our off-sites or when we do phenology here, we will go to a standardized set of plants that have already been picked out and been used throughout the years. And then we will just collect data on, do they have leaves? If so, how many of them are young? Do they have flowers? And how many? So those are the kinds of data that we will collect on the trees or the plants. And it's just a good way to see how the environment has been changing over the past few years, and how maybe that potentially has affected the kinds of birds that we're finding at these sites. So it's a lot of interrelationships between the plants and animals that we're studying.
I think, a lot of what we're collecting is information that gives us a sense for whether the timing of different events in a plant's life cycle is shifting. And that is something that I think a lot of biologists are very much focused on now, especially with climate change. It's part of a bigger picture to understand how all of the organisms are affected by changing warming periods and cooling periods, and understanding if there's starting to be mismatches between the timing of plants developing leaves and when insects are emerging and when birds are migrating. All of those things are really important to understand together in order to know how we need to conserve birds in a changing world.
So kind of the theme of today are baby birds, and so Sam gave you a little taste about how we identify birds, hummingbirds and songbirds. But kind of like I've been saying, another thing that we do is we take the sex of birds, and it can be pretty difficult to figure out if a bird is a male or female, and it very much so depends on the species as well as the season. So we have banding birds because it's the breeding season right now. And one way we're able to tell if a bird is a male or female is through breeding condition and characteristics. And so males of a lot of species will have something called the cloacal protuberance, which is like a swelling of the lower abdomen, and it assists in mating. And so for a lot of our species, when we see a cloacal protuberance on a bird, then we can call that bird a male, and we know that it's a male. But again, that's really only during the breeding season. If a bird is incubating or brooding, sitting on eggs, often that bird will shed their belly feathers, and their belly will become swelled and vascularized and filled with fluid. And this allows heat transfer to the eggs more easily. For almost all of our species, females are the only ones that get a brood patch. So kind of like a cloacal protuberance for males, if we see a brood patch on a bird where females are the only ones that get a brood patch, we can reliably call that bird a female. But in some species, the males maybe won't have a CP at that time or a cloacal protuberance at that time, and sometimes the males and females can both get brood patches. So, for example, wren tits, males and females will both get brood patches, as well as a lot of woodpeckers and a couple other species like that. So we have to turn to other metrics to determine the sex of them. One of the things we can use for woodpeckers, for example, plumage characteristics. In a lot of our species, males and females will look the same, but in some species they'll look different. So quite a few of our main woodpeckers that we get here, like hairy woodpecker and downy woodpecker, as well as northern flickers, the males will get some sort of red patch. So on hairy and downy woodpeckers, they'll get a red patch on their head, whereas females typically lack that. For northern flickers, the males will have like a red stripe on their cheek, and females don't. And so plumage is another way that we can tell apart males and females. But if none of those work, some birds require us to take measurements. This is typically birds of prey, and we don't use this for all of our birds because birds vary in their measurements anyway. But some birds of prey we can reliably sex through measurements. One of the main hawks that we catch here are sharp-shinned hawks. They're the smallest hawk in North America. They're quite small. They're about the size of a jay. And we do band them, and it's really cool and fun to get a sharp-shinned hawk. In most birds of prey, the females will be much bigger than the males, and so we'll take measurements and we can reliably tell apart males and female birds of prey based on the measurements and their body size. There are a few birds, like the wren tits, where the males and females look so similar that we really can't tell them apart, and so we actually never sex wren tits. But for most species, we're able to tell them apart.
We have one question from Amanda. Can we come visit and observe bird banding in person?
Oh, yeah. So we are actually open from sunrise to sunset, and our banding lab is now open to visitors. So feel free to stop by, and if you would like to view bird banding, definitely come from sunrise to 6 hours out. That's when we are usually banding in the morning, so come out early, and you'll also get to see more birds the earlier that you come. But yeah, the visitor center is now open to the public, so we have a very nice exhibit in there with lots of information and more bird decoys and whatnot. So definitely take a look and come out here, and we'll be out here usually, so if you have any more questions, feel free to come over to us and we'll answer any questions. We can show you how the nets look. We can take you on a net run if that's something that you're interested, so definitely come out and check us out.
And then, are we banding at Palo every day of the week, or are there certain days that we're not banding out here?
So we're banding Tuesdays through Sundays, not Mondays, but Tuesdays through Sundays. Feel free to come over and check us out.
We had one more question in the chat. How can people help birds during fledging season?
Yeah,
That's a great question.
Well, so one really important thing to do is to keep your pets indoors or like leashed if they're outside. Make sure that you're not letting your pets disturb any nests or any young birds. So when birds first fledge, they're often, especially songbirds, they're often a little awkward, a little clumsy. They're still learning how to fly, and a lot of fledglings will end up on the ground, and that's that's very normal for them. It's not unusual, but it is important to give them space. And so I guess I mentioned cats and dogs, but I guess that also refers to people. It's great if you see a baby bird and you're worried about it. Just know its parents are probably going to come back. They're probably feeding it. It's probably just figuring things out. It's worth watching if you're concerned to see if the parents are still coming back. But as long as the adult birds are around, a fledgling bird is usually totally fine on the ground. It's a very normal thing for them. And it can be kind of fun if you're at a safe distance. It can be kind of fun to like watch them kind of make their way around. What are other good things to think about during baby season?
During baby season. One thing I think for all seasons, but especially when there's lots of new birds and young birds around, if you have bird feeders, do clean your bird feeders. A lot of people don't necessarily know about this, and it's an easy thing to do. But we recommend cleaning your feeders often and using vinegar. There are some diseases and different sicknesses out there that can be spread through bird feeders. So that's something we like to tell people. Also, windows. So you can see kind of in the windows around here, we have these like shoelaces that are kind of hanging down. And on these windows behind us, we have these bird stickers over here. And so we do recommend that people put things against their windows so birds don't fly into them. Often birds will see a tree reflected in the window and they want to fly to that tree, and so they'll fly into the window. So things like the shoelaces are really effective. They typically blow in the wind, and birds don't want to, they'll see that and they'll know that it's not a reflection. So we do recommend that people put those shoelaces or stickers on the windows to help birds not fly into them.
Okay, well, thank you everyone for coming and for spending time with us. We really appreciate you all taking the time, and we also do appreciate membership support. It's what keeps us running and allows us to do this kinds of work. So feel free to donate if you wish, but check out the Facebook page and the Instagram page if you want to learn more about Point Blue and Palomarin. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Bye.